Imagine this. You're going through your daily routine. Everything seems fine on the surface. You're functioning. You're present. But something deep within you is stirring. You can't name it yet. It's not sadness. It's not joy. It's something else. A quiet tension that lives between the lines of your life. It begins in subtle ways. A conversation you would have once tolerated now feels unbearable. A place that used to feel like home suddenly suffocates. You catch yourself staring into space, not out of boredom, but out of a strange sense that the world you've built is too small. There's a paradox here. Nothing is wrong, yet everything feels different. Like the clothes of your life no longer fit. Like the identity you've spent years crafting is growing threadbare. And for the first time, you start to question, who am I really? And have I ever truly lived as that person? Carl Jung called this moment the beginning of individuation, the turning point where the self begins to separate from the persona, the mask we wear for the world. It is not a crisis. It is a calling. But it often masquerades as confusion, fatigue, or emotional detachment. You find yourself drawn to silence, not out of despair, but out of necessity. You begin to crave something raw, unfiltered, something real. And that craving isn't for a new goal or another accomplishment. It's for something far more elusive, wholeness. But what does that mean, to be whole? Is it to be healed, enlightened, free? Or is it something deeper, something buried beneath the noise of modern life? You start remembering things, not events, but feelings. Glimpses of your younger self, before the conditioning, before the expectations, before the compromises. You feel a pull, not backward into nostalgia, but inward, into truth, into the self. And as this pull grows stronger, you begin to realize something unnerving. Maybe the life you've built was not chosen, but inherited. Maybe your ambitions were adaptations. Maybe your confidence was performance. Maybe you've been surviving and calling it success. This is the great rupture. The unsettling realization that the person you've shown the world is not the whole truth. Not a lie, but not the whole truth. And now the self demands to be seen. But where do you begin? What if you've spent so long adapting that you no longer recognize the shape of your soul? What if the confusion you feel is not weakness, but wisdom? What if the discomfort is not a sign to numb, but an invitation to listen? You are standing at the edge of a threshold. Behind you, everything that was expected of you. Ahead of you, everything you could become if you're willing to let the false self die. This is not a journey of addition, but of subtraction. A shedding, a simplification, a remembering. But the world won't validate this path. It will call it a phase, a crisis, a collapse, because the world fears what it cannot control. And nothing is more uncontrollable than a person who becomes whole. So here you are, on the verge of something raw, real, and irreversible. Not the next chapter, the true one. And if you've felt any of this, then maybe you've already begun. The question now is not whether you're changing. The question is, asterisk, asterisk, will you answer the call before it fades? Asterisk, asterisk, let's go deeper. There's a reason most people never become who they truly are. Not because they're incapable, but because the world teaches us, from an early age, to trade authenticity for approval. This is the hidden problem. We retrain to suppress what is real in favor of what is acceptable. You're taught not to cry too loudly, laugh too hard, want too much, need too deeply. You're taught to shrink your desires, soften your voice, and mimic what works for others. It begins innocently, through praise, punishment, comparison. But slowly, you forget how to live from within. Carl Jung warned about this distortion. He called it the creation of the persona, the social mask we develop to navigate society. It helps us survive, but it also becomes a prison. Because the more you identify with the mask, the more distant you become from your true nature. And so you lose touch with instinct, with desire, with purpose. But the self doesn't disappear. It waits, watching, and eventually it begins to whisper. You start to notice the second invisible sign. You begin grieving things you never consciously lost. This grief comes not from events, but from the quiet realization that you've betrayed parts of yourself. The child who wanted to create, the adolescent who felt deeply, the adult who wanted rest, not performance. You grieve not for what was, but for what was never allowed. This grief is sacred. It's not weakness. It's your inner self breaking the surface, asking to be held. And soon another sign emerges, unexpected, but telling. You begin to reject superficial ambitions. The goals that once drove you now feel hollow. Not wrong, just irrelevant. You look at the ladder you've been climbing and realize it's just leaning against the wrong wall. Success no longer intoxicates. Approval no longer satisfies, because now you want something real, something whole. This is what Jung meant when he said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But this is dangerous territory, because society rewards personas, not selves. And so, the moment you stop performing, the moment you reclaim your authenticity, you start losing the crowd. You notice it in conversations, in relationships, in expectations. This leads to the fourth invisible sign. You begin to crave solitude, not out of sadness, but out of clarity. Silence becomes sacred. Space becomes healing. You withdraw not to escape, but to listen. The noise of the world no longer drowns your intuition. In the quiet, you begin to recognize what your soul has been trying to say all along. This solitude isn't loneliness. It's alignment. You begin sensing who you are without the noise of who you're supposed to be. And in this space, you begin to remember. You are never meant to be understood by everyone. You are meant to be understood by yourself. This is only the beginning. The signs will keep unfolding. The real you is emerging. But before that emergence can be complete, you must understand what's really been driving your old identity. Let's go further. You didn't notice when it started. You only realized much later that your body had been speaking for years through tension in your shoulders, the tightness in your chest, the constant pressure behind your eyes. These weren't random symptoms. They were protests. Your psyche was screaming through your skin, and you called it stress. Carl Jung warned that what we repress does not vanish. It regresses, festers, and leaks into our behaviors, our reactions, even our dreams. And when you ignore your truth long enough, it doesn't go away. It begins to shape your entire life from the shadows. This is the fifth invisible sign. You start noticing the cost of your coping. It's not always dramatic. It's not a breakdown or a diagnosis. It's subtle, a constant fatigue, a dullness to joy, a sense that no matter how much you accomplish, something's missing. You've learned to smile without feeling, to function without fulfillment. And now you can see it clearly. You've been operating from adaptation, not authenticity. You built a self to survive, and it served you, but now it imprisons you. You begin to see how many of your reactions weren't conscious choices, but conditioned defenses. You weren't deciding. You were deflecting, pleasing, performing, protecting. You called it maturity. In truth, it was armoring. You stopped blaming others, not because they were innocent, but because they realized the most dangerous control is the one you never noticed, the one you gave away. You did it to feel safe, to be liked, to be enough. But here's the cost. You lost your center. In a world obsessed with productivity and performance, becoming yourself is the ultimate rebellion, because it requires slowing down, feeling deeply, saying no, confronting illusions, and daring to exist without permission. This is where the sixth invisible sign begins to reveal itself, not as an event, but as a transformation, You stop reacting and start responding. It sounds simple, but it's profound. Because the old version of you that flinched at rejection, exploded in defensiveness, chased validation. The becoming you pauses, it listens, it breathes. Not because it's passive, but because it no longer needs chaos to feel alive. This shift is invisible to most people, but to you, it's everything. It's the difference between being controlled by your past and creating from your present. You begin to see how often people confuse speed with power, noise with truth, and control with confidence. You begin to recognize these illusions in conversations, in culture, even in yourself. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You begin to ask better questions. Not what do they think of me, but what do I think of myself when I'm with them? Not how do I succeed, but what does success look like when I'm not abandoning myself to get there? You notice how your mind still tries to grasp for certainty, and you no longer obey it blindly. You let it panic. You let it rush. And then you come back to yourself. Carl Jung taught that wholeness is not achieved by chasing light, but by integrating shadow. And now you understand what that means. You're not seeking perfection. You're seeking presence. You're learning how to hold your contradictions without shame. You can feel both grief and gratitude in the same breath. You can miss the old while honoring the new. You can love people deeply and still walk away when they cost you your peace. This is the maturity no one talks about, the quiet rebellion of becoming whole. But it's not easy, because now you see the unseen. You see how much of modern life is a masquerade. You see how consumerism preys on inadequacy, how relationships often mask control, how success stories are crafted from wounds, not wisdom. You see how much you lied to yourself just to belong. And that is the heartbreak. Realizing that most of your life was designed to keep you asleep, and how many people will never wake up. It's tempting to retreat, to isolate, to rage, but that would only be another mask. What's needed now is something far more courageous: integration. You're not meant to escape the world. You're meant to return to it as your true self, to engage without losing yourself, to express without performing, to connect without compromising. And that, right there, is the turning point, when you stop seeking freedom in escape and begin finding it in alignment. You're no longer asking, how do I fix myself? You're asking, how do I live in a way that reflects the truth of who I am? The signs have been unfolding not just to alert you, but to prepare you for what comes next. Because the old scripts won't serve you now. It's time to rebel not in anger, but in authenticity, to challenge the stories that kept you small, to reclaim the pieces you exiled, to rise not as a new version of yourself, but as the original one finally remembered. And if that sounds impossible, that's okay. Because what comes next isn't about certainty. It's about surrendering to your own becoming. Let's begin. You don't break free all at once. No one does. There is no lightning strike, no singular moment where the old self shatters and the true self steps forward, fully formed. That's a fantasy. What happens instead is quieter, subtler. A rebellion born not in rage, but in radical honesty. You begin by disobeying the inner voices that once ruled you, not with violence, but with stillness. You stop rushing to prove your worth. You stop forcing your presence into spaces that don't feel right. You stop apologizing for your boundaries, your softness, your depth. And in doing so, you disrupt the old system one belief at a time. Because the truth is, you are never stuck. You are loyal. Loyal to an identity someone else needed you to be. But now, that loyalty is breaking. And what rises in its place is the seed of something far more powerful: self-belonging. Carl Jung understood that the greatest act of courage is not to fight the world, but to be yourself in it. To live from the core, not the costume. But this requires more than insight. It requires undoing. You begin to question everything. You look at your routines not through the lens of efficiency, but of alignment. Why do I do this? Who taught me that this matters? Does this serve the person I'm becoming? You examine your relationships not by how much they demand of you, but by how deeply they see you. Am I loved for who I am or for what I provide? Do I feel safe to be whole or just useful? You begin to feel a strange sense of peace, not because your life is easier, but because it's finally yours. This is the quiet power of a person reclaiming their soul. And it terrifies people. Why? Because once you stop outsourcing your validation, you become immune to manipulation. And that threatens the very fabric of a society built on control. This is your rebellion. You're no longer seduced by surface. You don't chase shallow connections. You don't confuse busyness with purpose. You don't accept love that costs you your voice. You don't decorate your cage and call it freedom. You are done betraying yourself for belonging. Instead, you start doing something radical. You honor your inner signals. You feel the discomfort in your gut and listen to it. You notice the fatigue after certain conversations and set limits. You feel the ease in certain spaces and you move toward it. You begin treating your intuition as sacred intelligence, not a glitch to override. And slowly, what was once invisible becomes embodied. You walk differently. You speak with less effort and more truth. You stop defending your choices. They become self-evident. This is the reclamation of power. But here's the paradox. The more you align, the more you'll be misunderstood. People will project onto you. They'll call you arrogant, distant, selfish. Not because you are, but because they've never seen someone unmask this unapologetically. Let them. You weren't meant to be universally understood. You were meant to be whole, and wholeness is disruptive. It's inconvenient. It doesn't fit neatly into the boxes the world has built. Carl Jung wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." He was right. Because once you do, there's no turning back. You can't fake laugh through small talk. You can't hustle for attention. You can't dim your truth to maintain harmony. That life is over. And this new one? It's quieter, but fuller. Lonelier, sometimes, but real. It asks more of you, but it gives more in return. You stop seeking excitement and start seeking meaning. You stop trying to be impressive and start trying to be honest. You stop asking, "What do they want from me?" and start asking, "What do I need from myself?" This is your rebellion, not to burn the world down, but to stop burning yourself out. You're not here to fit in. You're here to remember who you were before the world told you who to be. So how do you do it? One breath at a time. One choice at a time. You stop outsourcing your truth to trends, to titles, to tribes. You sit in silence until your own voice becomes louder than theirs. You write your own definitions of success. You create sacred pauses in your day, not to be productive, but to be present. You find the people who don't flinch at your truth, and you keep them close. You find the practices that ground you, not perform you, and you make them non-negotiable. And when fear arises, and it will, you do the unthinkable. You stay. You stay with the discomfort. You stay with the doubt. You stay with the edge until you see that beyond it is you, whole, unedited, unrepeatable, and finally, free. You thought the transformation would feel like light breaking through the clouds, but it doesn't, not exactly. It feels like standing in the ashes of everything that once defined you, holding nothing but your own breath, and realizing, for the first time, it's enough. Not the version of you that hustled for approval. Not the one who betrayed themselves to belong. Not the one who wore the perfect mask so well, they started to believe it was skin. No, the you that's left now is quiet, but uncheckable, because what you found is not a new identity. What you found is your essence. The final truth isn't something you add to your life. It's what's been left once everything false has fallen away. And here's the paradox. You spent your life chasing things that would make you feel full, only to discover that fullness comes from emptiness, from releasing, from not needing. You used to think freedom was the ability to do whatever you wanted. Now you understand. Freedom is being unchained from what you no longer need to prove. Carl Jung once wrote, "We meet ourselves time and again in 1,000 disguises on the path of life. But the most radical encounter is when you meet yourself without disguise. No performance, no editing, no echo of the world's expectations. Just you, raw, vulnerable, eternal. You stop asking, 'What's next?' Instead, you ask, 'What wants to move through me now?' You stop seeking control and start cultivating trust. Trust in your body, your intuition, your timing, your path. You begin to see life not as a staircase of achievements, but as a spiral of returnings, deeper and deeper into the soul. You understand that breakdowns were not interruptions. They were invitations. They were your soul refusing to continue on false terms. You understand that the anxiety was not weakness. It was wisdom, rattling the bars of your cage. You understand that the lost years were not wasted. They were sacred. They were when the seed cracked open. And most of all, you understand this. Nothing is coming to save you, because nothing needs to. You've already returned to what's real. This is the moment when life begins again, but not as a chase, as a communion. You no longer need to convince anyone of your value. You simply live it, quietly, powerfully. You no longer cling to timelines. You follow resonance. You follow peace. You follow what feels like truth in your bones. And what happens next is not spectacular in the way the world defines it. It's spectacular in the way existence itself is. You start laughing again, not performatively, but from your belly. You cry, not in collapse, but in relief. You say no, not in rebellion, but in self-respect. You love, not to complete yourself, but to reflect the love you've already found within. This is not the next level. This is the origin, the place before the world told you who to be. And when you live from this place, something strange happens. You become magnetic, not because you've changed, but because you've remembered. You become clear, grounded, not easily shaken. You're not above others. You're simply rooted in yourself. People feel it in your presence, in your words, in your silence. Some will misunderstand. Some will leave. Let them. Because now you stay with yourself, fully, lovingly, finally. And the greatest irony? You spent your whole life searching for something outside you. Approval, purpose, identity. Only to arrive at the truth Jung hinted at again and again. The treasure you've been seeking was buried in the shadow you were taught to fear. Now you know. And once you know, you can never go back. Only forward. Only deeper. Only freer. This is your becoming. Not loud, but unshakable. Not perfect, but whole. And that changes everything.